Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Master Series, your guide to intelligent production, brought to you by Entertainment Partners. I'm your host, Natalie Nelson. In the Master Series, we focus on the important issues impacting the entertainment industry and its workers through in-depth discussions with legal, tax, payroll, technology, and production experts. And today, our experts will be discussing the UK's cultural test and sharing tips that will help you pass the test and have a smooth application process, an important step to accessing the UK's tax incentives. A couple of quick housekeeping items as we get started today. First, we encourage you to join the conversation by posting questions for us in the Q&A section of the Zoom call. You can do so by clicking the Q&A icon in the navigation menu. We'll do our best to save time at the end of today's discussion to answer your questions. Also, please take a few moments after our discussion to answer a short feedback survey. This is an opportunity for you to give us feedback about today's conversation, as well as to suggest topics for future webinars. Your feedback is very important to us, and we thank you for it. Now I'm pleased to introduce today's panelists. First with us today is Alex Ashworth, Head of Production at Anton. In her role at Anton, Alex has oversight and management of all live productions across budgets spanning $5 million to $80 million. Prior to joining Anton, Alex spent 7 years as an independent producer for UK indie Mad as Birds. Her notable credits include 6 Minutes to Midnight, The Vanishing, and most recently, Rabbit Trap, which has made its debut at this year's Sundance Film Festival. Her producing work has included production services for U.S. films, structuring, managing, and claiming of UK tax credits, and end-to-end production management for projects in the UK. Alex specializes in developing innovative financial models to optimize European production incentives while collaborating with external producers to align creative vision with regulatory and financial requirements. We are also pleased to welcome Chris Halliday, Head of Certification at the British Film Institute, or BFI. Chris joined the BFI in 2011 and is now Head of Certification, working across all creative industry credits, assessing and providing guidance on the cultural test and on co-production. Chris works closely with key stakeholders in government and industry to provide advice and guidance on the application process for the cultural test, co-production, and policy. An expert on the subject, Chris possesses extensive knowledge of the cultural test and co-production treaties, the gateway to accessing the expenditure credits. And he is on hand to discuss qualifying, including the new enhanced AVEC for low-budget films, the IFTC, and what the increased rate for the credit could be for your project. Also with us today is Lloyd Gunton, Director of Creative Sector Tax Incentives here at Entertainment Partners. Lloyd has over 13 years of experience in accounting practice, including training at Ernst & Young in its media audit division, before moving to Safri Champness to specialize in creative sector tax credits. He has worked with productions ranging from micro-budget independent films to some of the biggest Hollywood blockbusters and high-end television shows. These include No Time to Die, His Dark Materials, The Wheel of Time, 1917, and the recent remake of Bergerac. Lloyd joined Entertainment Partners in April of 2023 and heads up the UK Creative Sector Incentives offering. And finally, today our moderator is Joseph Chianese, Senior Vice President and Production Incentive Practice Leader here at Entertainment Partners. In his role, Joe provides production and legislative consulting, financial, tax, and administrative services for domestic and international production incentives. He has over 35 years of accounting, government affairs, production incentives, and tax experience. And in his past roles, he has held positions at Sony Pictures Entertainment, the Walt Disney Company, ABC Television Network, Paramount Pictures, and Ernst & Young. Hello, panelists, and thank you for joining us today. It's lovely to see all of you. All right.
Well, good day, everyone. And I'm just really excited to talk about this topic. Talking about the UK is one of my favorite topics, especially today as we share all the recent improvements to the UK incentive program and also demystify the application process, specifically the cultural test. You know, as an industry, the last 5 years has been challenging, to say the least, with the pandemic and the strikes. And now currently we're dealing with major economic challenges, the cost of production and the potential impact of tariffs. And then, of course, there's the global decline in production. But on the positive side, you know, we're seeing the resurgence of the independent producer, and we're also seeing continual impact of the streamers on local production. You know, the big hit Adolescence right now out of the UK just shows you again the impact of local production on a global level. So I'm excited to see more of that. We saw that with Squid Games and other productions. So again, there are positive things happening as well. And of course, the continued growth and improvement in production incentives, which, it's really a big effort to help revitalize production. Here in the US, we're in the middle of the legislative session with some positive and impactful proposed changes in California and New York, as well as other states. Internationally, we continue to see new incentive programs, as well as improved programs throughout the world. That topic is way too much to cover here, but look forward to probably our next webinar, where we'll cover the recent changes in the UK incentives, as well as the changes around the world. But today, it's all about the UK. As I mentioned, the UK continues to improve its incentives for film, TV, visual effects, animation, and gaming. And we're going to be talking about that in a few minutes. But the overall goal here for this master series is to help you navigate through that application process, especially the cultural tests. So I guess just to kick it off, let's have Lloyd just give us a recap of what's changed in the UK over the last, 12 to 18 months, right, Lloyd?
Yeah, it's the biggest change we've had in 10 years, effectively. So we're all now under AVEC, which is the overarching scheme now. It's replaced tax credit, but the fundamentals remain the same. We've got the film AVEC and high-end TV AVEC. They're at an effective rate of 25.5%. We've then got the independent film tax credit, or low budget film, which you've got a cap of 23.5 million to qualify for that, and a rate of 39.75 on up to 15 million. And then you've got the sort of mid-range credits, if you will, children's programming and animation. These are at 29.25 effective rates. But then what we've also had, which went live 10 days ago for applications, is our VFX enhanced rate. It's important, this isn't a VFX credit. It's part of the standard rate AVEC for film and high-end TV. And that means that on your VFX, UK VFX spend, you can get up to 29.25% now on your UK VFX. And that's not subject to our 80% cap. So there's a double benefit on the VFX side. One thing we often get asked is there a post-production incentive in the UK? No, is the answer. There isn't a post-production incentive, but you can qualify for incentive on just post-production. As long as you're spending 10% of your budget in the UK, it doesn't matter if that's on shoot or post. It could matter for the cultural test, as Chris will explain to us later on, but you still qualify for incentive if you meet all the other bits. There's not a separate stream. The VFX credit isn't a separate stream. It's all part of our AVEC. And Joe, your favourite thing about the UK, you can get tax incentive on back end, which always makes you smile. Gift that keeps giving. We are unique as far as I'm aware in that there is the ability to get incentive subject to correct structuring on participations and residuals and payments to back-end talent if their underlying fee qualified as well.
The other thing I'm really, well, maybe excited is the wrong word, but the other thing I love about the UK is the used and consumed concept. Maybe you can just talk about that a little bit in terms of, equipment and things, in terms of that they necessarily don't have to be purchased in the UK. And that's also very unique, not just to the UK, but it's also something really great to highlight.
Yeah, so as you say, our basis is used and consumed. If you use the goods or services in the UK and they're consumed in the UK, it qualifies. The easiest example is Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise was here to shoot scenes for Mission Impossible. So for the proportion of his time that he was in the UK, his fee qualified. It's subject to correctly qualifying for the UK incentive, but it is how our system works. Yes, he's American, but his services were used in the UK for, let's say, 30% of the shoot. So 30% of his fee would qualify.
So, Lloyd, basically under these new rules, nothing's really changed except for now you've got the independent film credit and the new rules for visual effects, but the rules themselves haven't really changed. Just the rates have changed, correct?
That's correct. There's been a slight change to the base rate from 25 up to 25.5, and the increases for kids TV and animation to 29.25, and the IFTC for even higher. But the rules of what qualifies and what doesn't qualify, what's UK and what's not UK, all of that stayed the same. And the rules for the cultural test have stayed the same, with some additional criteria for the low budget film, independent film tax credit, which I think we'll touch on later on.
And I guess the other thing, I know we didn't really want to get into it in detail, but I know there's the gross percentage and then there's a net percentage. And I think that sometimes even I got confused myself in putting the outline together. So at the end of the day, there is a gross percentage and it nets down based on the UK tax rate because there is a tax impact, correct, on the credit itself?
That's correct. The new structure of the credit is that you get a gross credit. IFTC is the best example of this. The gross credit is 53%, but you will always be taxed, and effectively the HMRC, tax authority, will withhold 25% of that as corporation tax. So that 53% net 25 gives you 39.75%, and it's just the mechanism by which the new regime has been brought in for worldwide tax reasons.
Well, I'll just say the other thing I'm really excited about is the independent film credit at the 39.75%. I always round it up to 40, and it's interesting. Once the UK did that, Ireland followed suit, and then here in the US, we're seeing, states like New York trying to again attract the independent producer, which is why I mentioned earlier the resurgence of the independent producer. I think we're going to see that increase as the studios and the streamers maybe cut back slightly on their slate. We're going to need the independent producers to sort of take up the slack. So I think I'm happy to see that the incentive programs in the UK and other places are supporting that. So happy about that as well. Maybe before we jump into the cultural test itself, maybe talk a bit about the application process itself in terms of who should apply and how to apply it. I know there's talks about SPVs and the production company. Maybe basically just walk through those steps briefly.
Yeah. So the certificate needs to be issued in the name of your SPV. So it has to be issued in the name of the SPV that's going to make the film. Who actually fills in the application is up to the producer. It can be the producer themselves, and often for relatively simple ones, they might do it themselves. For other ones, they might say, "Oh, someone like us as an advisor, can you do it?" Or there might be a hybrid. Often producer will put it together and I'll have a look and give them some advice on it. But you need our involvement for certain elements of it, particularly at final and for the IFTC at interim, which I know we're going to cover. But yeah, the earlier you do it for an interim, the better, because there's two certificates. Final you can only do when you've got a completed film, because Chris and his team have to sit there and they get the pleasure of watching all the fantastic TV shows and films that everyone's creating here.
Yeah, I know that in a lot of other places, you either need to work through a production services company in the UK or set up your own company in the UK, and that's really at the option of the producer, correct?
Yeah, they can use a production services company here to own the SPV, or they can own the SP themselves. The ownership of the SPV doesn't matter for purposes of qualifying for the cultural test. It just has to be a UK company subject to UK corporation tax and has to be responsible for the entire production, which we've discussed at length in articles and webinars and all sorts of other places. So have a look on our website and you can see some more on that.
Right. And I'm glad you mentioned our website. The EP has a website. If you go to ep.com, we summarize all the incentives in the US and around the world. And we also have a monthly newsletter that you could sign up for that highlights all the legislative changes that are either happening or proposed. So we'll talk a bit more about that later. But I think the topic of the day is the cultural test. And it's a topic that I know over the years have scared producers away. Hearing the term British film, this needs to be a British film. A lot of people think of either Harry Potter or Merchant Ivory, and it's amazing. And we'll talk how many films actually can qualify and do qualify. Just because of this cultural test, it's not as complicated as some people think, and that concept of British film isn't what people imagine. So maybe, Lloyd, you can talk a bit about the details of that, and then we'll have Chris talk about the process itself.
Sure. So a high-level basis, and we'll bring some slides up here just to demonstrate the summary. There are 35 points that are available for the cultural test. In order to pass the cultural test, you need to get 18 points. There is only one banned combination of points, and I'll definitely defer to Chris to run you through that if you don't mind, Chris. But you can qualify, as you see there, in Section A. So Section A might be Harry Potter. It's in the UK. It's British characters, nice and simple. But that's not to say you can't qualify because it's not set in the UK. There's lots of other considerations. So the 4 parts, we get cultural content. So this is what you're seeing on screen. This is where it's set, who the characters are, things like that. Cultural contribution, these are, and we'll bring up more slides later on it when we go through some of the detail. This is diversity, British creativity, British heritage. And then we move into cultural hubs. This is where activity took place. And then cultural practitioners is who did the work. If we can flick onto the next slide, Natalie, just to high level run through the boring bit before we can all chat through it. So Section A, so you can qualify in Section A. Film is set in the UK, up to 4 points available here, and it tiers down depending on percentage. Lead characters are British or EEA citizens or residents. So where do we believe the characters are? Doesn't matter about the actors, about the characters. And again, up to 4 points depending on your combination there. The film is based on British or EEA subject matter or underlying material. So best example that always comes to my mind here would be something like The Lion King is Hamlet. It's based on Shakespeare. It is actually British underlying material. And then language. The dialogue is recorded in English, an indigenous UK language, Gaelic, Celtic, something like that, or an EEA language. So up to it, and again, that's tiered based on percentages. Chris, I think you're probably best to explain some of the creativity and heritage and diversity considerations, because that's one of the more subjective areas I always find when I'm filling these in for people.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I think a good kind of thing to note is obviously in Section A there, it does include EEA content. So we're not just looking at UK setting, UK characters.
Yeah.
And I think, as Lloyd has said already, just never assume you're not going to pass the cultural test. It's been brought in and kind of created to be very accessible. So if you're not achieving those points for setting, lead characters, or even a British or European subject matter or underlying material, we've had many projects that have just achieved points in A4 for the dialogue and still been able to pass the cultural test. So it's definitely very accessible. And Section B is a good section for those projects that are picking up only a few points in, or maybe 6 points in Section A. You can top up your points in Section B. So British creativity, that's looking for something unique or innovative in the project. And generally it's within the post-production area, VFX area. I guess just note British creativity. So it needs to be a British team kind of bring in this innovative or unique piece of work. Heritage is also British heritage, and that is looking at whether we're promoting British heritage in terms of maybe landmarks in the project, historical subject matter that's looking at, it could be recent history or history from the past of Britain. And then diversity, obviously that's not just British diversity. We're looking at diversity for the entire project on screen and off screen. And you can get up to 2 points for that. So it's a good area to kind of top up those points if you're kind of, I guess, not struggling, but kind of trying to hit that 18-point mark. So yeah, on screen, off screen, and it can be diverse lead actors or diverse subject matter, or anything on screen that is diverse. And then off screen, obviously, we're looking at the person's making the film or TV program. And again, it's just a matter of showing us who has done that in terms of diversity. So yeah, Section B is kind of a really kind of key one for topping up those points, definitely.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's surprising how many things you can get in there and what would qualify and bits like that from what I've seen in the past as well.
Yeah, I'm very open to kind of discussing about it.
Mm.
Even before you submitted an application, I would definitely kind of recommend speaking to us if you're unsure of any sections or if you're unsure of an argument you're putting together. We'll always talk to you and kind of.
I sent one into you earlier this week.
Exactly. So yeah, it's not submit an application and you don't hear from us ever again, and you get a tick or a cross. It's very much come to us before or during, and we'll speak to you if we have any questions, etc. So yeah, it's a very open process.
Yeah.
So Chris, that is the one that I find really interesting. That the cultural content, so how creative you can actually get in terms of qualifying for that. I've heard some interesting examples in terms of storylines that are set in modern times, but in terms of tracing back, and there could be how it originates back to some sort of content back in the UK. Maybe you can give some examples of some of films that satisfy that cultural content component.
In terms of British creativity, sorry?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, so I mean, British creativity, it is looking for something new and innovative. I mean, I'd said it is generally post-production or VFX element. And if you can demonstrate to us that it's something that's not been used before within a film or TV project, or kind of a way you've kind of brought in new technology or kind of adapted something specifically for this film, we're very open to hearing about that.
And
so if it's a documentary, we can look at subject matter in terms of a subject within a documentary that's not been tackled before. So yeah, it's a very it's an area that we're open to hearing different kind of suggestions to how you feel it is new and innovative or pushing those boundaries. So yeah.
I mean, we've just had a question in the chat, and it relates to one of these in terms of colonial history and things like that. That's absolutely something you can go for in terms of heritage as well, because it's part of British history. It might be set overseas. I think even in the guidance notes, it references Gandhi as an example film-wise. The story of Gandhi, yes, it's an Indian story, but it's part of British history as well in a very important way. So there's definitely elements there. Conscious to sort of cover the last couple of bits as well here in terms of the cultural hubs. This is relatively straightforward, actually. If you do 50% of principal photography, so we're looking at shoot days, special effects or VFX spend, if that takes place in the UK, you get 2 points. Or if any of the above exceed 80%, there's another 2 points. You can have 250% or you can have 180% to get your 4. And then if 50% of music recording, audio post-production or picture post-production takes place in the UK, that gets you a point as well. So going to our post-production example from earlier, there's, as well as there being incentive there's good points available in the cultural test from post-production in the UK as well. So certainly viable option. And then the final one is basically who did it. So who did the work? Are they British or EEA? Chris quite rightly corrected me earlier for saying UK too much. Are they British or EEA national or resident? It can be either. You'd have to prove that the person was permanently resident here, or passport holder national for the UK or EEA. So 1 point for each of these being director, script writer, or if there's multiple script writers, one of 3, the lead 3, producer, again, lead producer, one of 3, composer, normally there's only 1. One of your 3 lead actors is worth a point. If the majority of cast by headcount are British or EEA, that's worth a point. This one is often misunderstood. Chris, I'm sure you've had plenty of applications that have thought they can get 7 points here because they can hit all of these. These are all British. You get 1 point if any of the roles listed on screen are British. And then the last point we typically would want to claim, if the majority of production crew are British or EA national or resident, the only reason it's the last one is that you can imagine that production crew numbers are very high on a lot of films, so it can end up being an awful lot of testing. So yeah, it's wide ranging. It's not just British. There's EEA elements to it as well, and really, as I said at the start, almost any combination of points is allowable.
I think just a note on section D, so director, scriptwriter, producer, you can have the same person within each area there. So if it's the same director, scriptwriter, producer, one person doing the whole lot, you can get a point for each of those. So
yeah, indie films often worry about that, don't they?
Yeah. And then looking at section C2 again, so audio post, picture post, music recording, to get the 1 point, you only need one of those elements. You don't need to do all of those elements in the UK. It's just, if 50% of music recording is done in the UK, you get 1 point.
Yeah, why don't we jump to Alex and as our producer, and maybe she can share her experiences with the cultural test and maybe even share some examples.
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, when we start at Anton, we get a lot of projects sent to us that we'll start doing feasibility studies on quite early on. So I'm looking at a project as soon as it comes in the door to think, okay, where can we shoot this creatively? What can we do in the UK? How can we maximize? And then obviously we'll look at other territories, but focusing in on the UK, we work a lot with the US, and we're often sent projects that don't have a lot of UK elements. So I'll start looking at something and breaking it down. I'll use a project called Absolute Phase as an example. It's still early days. It is set in the US, and we have a US kind of one lead cast attached and US writer-director. So you kind of take that to one side. It's not based on EA underlying material. So I think if you looked at that on the face of it, like Chris said, it's quite. You can look at something and think, oh, that's not a British film. But when you actually dig into the test, as we just saw, there's a lot you can make work there. So I'd be looking at that film, talking to the producers, going, okay, we can make this work, but we need to think about maybe the characters in the film. Maybe there's something we do here to reframe them. If they're all US in the original script, let's look at that. Why are they all US? Let's think about EA characters, UK characters. So there's work in development you can do early on, just to reframe maybe some of the characters. If the film is set in multiple places and it's not set in stone where those need to be, say the majority is the US, but there's a destination location, and say it was the Caribbean, can you reframe that narratively to Tenerife, Gran Canaria? It's what can we do to just hone things a little bit more?
Does the beach have to be in the Caribbean? Could it be in the Mediterranean?
Exactly.
Right.
So they're things that I tend to look at in development early on, when we can have an impact on script and make sure that we are structuring it in the right way early doors. From then on, it's looking at, once you pass the development point, bringing on all the right HODs. I know you only get 1 point, as Chris just said, but structuring through ancillary cast to maximize that section D. If we're going to be filming, say, the majority in the UK, so it's over the 80% mark, it's very easy to make sure you're pretty much qualifying for most of section D, apart from, your writer-director. So I think as my key takeaway for when you're reviewing a project is dig in at a development stage, look at the script, go through the test, see what you're wedded to narratively, and are there things we can change to really, emphasize the EEA elements.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, obviously we don't want producers, applicants having to change the content of their film to specifically pass the cultural test, because we don't want to kind of drive that. But as Alex says, it may sometimes be necessary if you're looking for an extra 2 points or something, we've definitely had projects before where a lead character's nationality has been squeezed into a script, say a line referring to their heritage being from Ireland or anything like that. It's fairly simple.
The Irish in Boston in American films.
Yeah. It's a straightforward thing to do. And yeah, it is a way to sometimes pick up a couple of points within the test.
So, Chris, let me ask you if it's possible. I know that there's examples of certain films like Steve Jobs or Avengers, Infinity Wars, or Wonder Woman 1984, or even Civil War, how those type of projects, when you, on the surface, you might think, how would these qualify under the cultural test? Is there anything you could share about these projects and how they satisfy those tests?
I think Gravity is quite a good example. It's all set in space. Mm-hmm. And that was certified as a British project. You pick up your points, as Alex said, from section C and D, doing all your post-production in the UK. I mean, you don't have to do all your post-production, but just elements to be able to pick up all those points in C1 and C2. And then, just thinking carefully about your HODs and the personnel within section D to pick up points. Gravity picked up a good amount of points in section A3 because of the scriptwriter being resident in the UK. So, I mean, every film has its ways of kind of just looking, is that person a resident, or can we kind of do this element here? Can we tweak the script in that way? But as I said, we prefer not to kind of update scripts and etc. if possible, but the cultural test has been created in a way that kind of enables you to look at all those different points and kind of see where we're able to top up the points, even if it's set in space or it's set in the US. I would always say come to us early. We can read through scripts. We can do what's called letters of comfort and kind of guide you where you're going to be picking up points, where you're falling short on points, and we can kind of look together where the other possibilities are to kind of get to those 18 points.
Yeah, it's really great, Chris, that you highlighted that. I think we did a webinar about a year ago, and we had the producer, I think it was The Beekeeper, and that, if I'm not getting that wrong, I think that project was not set in the UK, it was actually set in Ohio, but yet obviously it still qualified as a British film and qualified for the UK incentive. So it's important for everyone listening to realize, and again, glad you highlighted how much BFI can help in terms of making sure a project can, satisfy these tests. So that's great to highlight those things. But I think the next thing I wanted to chat about, if we could, is the actual applying for the certificate in terms of the process. So that maybe there's something that Lloyd and Chris can walk us through.
Sure. I mean, the new portal for applying for the certificate, I say new, it's 2 years old now, I think, Chris, isn't it? Is that right?
Yeah, it's about that. Yeah, maybe a little bit more, but it's all online now. Yeah,
it's fantastic. It's really good. It walks you through it. It tells you what you need to do. So you apply via an online portal. There's elements that you need to. It walks you through the tests we just put up on screen. There's things you need to submit. You need to send in shooting schedules, a budget, the script, etc., etc. And once you've done that, it's 8 to 10 weeks to get the certificate back and a decision. During that time, what happens is any questions get raised to you. So Chris or one of his team will email and just say, "Can we confirm this? Can you explain that if you need to?" As Chris said, it's not just a blank and we give you a yes or no and you have to figure out why. It's much more collaborative than that. There's two types of certificate. There's an interim and a final. Interim certificates you can get at any point, but you would need one if you're going to make an interim claim before the film is completed. Final claim you can only get, as I said, once it's completed, because you need to send in your film. or TV show for the BFI to review. There is, I mentioned earlier about accountants reports, for the final cultural test, if you're getting points in section C and D, so that's where activity took place or who did the activity, then you need an external auditor to sign an accountant's report confirming that they have tested it and that that's correct and accurate. If you're just getting points in sections A and B, you don't need an accountant's report for final. And if you're an interim, you don't need an accountant's report at all because it's all projected what's going to happen. There is an exception to that, though, which is for IFTC and the low budget film applications. You must have an accountant's report at interim and at final, but that is only to cover the specific criteria for qualifying for the IFTC, which is that your budget, your core spend is below 23.5 million, and you have either a British lead director or a British lead scriptwriter. And in that instance, it is British. It's not British or EEA. So the two go slightly different. Once the application goes in, I think, Chris, you're better to talk about the kind of process from your end, of course.
Yeah, so basically the BFI, we're the first point of contact. So the application will come to us and we'll be assessing it either through the cultural test or as an official co-production. Generally, most applications are cultural test. And as Lloyd says, there's an interim and a final stage. So interim, for our assessment, we'll be reading the scripts, we'll be looking at the budget, we'll be looking at the shooting schedule, and just kind of checking everything marries the points that you are claiming within the cultural test. If, say, you've claimed every single point in the cultural test to try and get as many points as you can, which is fine, we'll probably come back to you and say, you actually achieved 18 points in section A here. You're passing the cultural test in section A, so we're not going to assess sections B, C, and D. It's basically going to speed up the assessment, and it will also mean, as Lloyd just mentioned, the accountant's report is final. You won't need to do one of those to verify those points in section C and D. So we'll always try and make it as straightforward and simple for you. And kind of, if you're claiming too many points, then we'll just kind of come back to you and let you know which ones you should probably be going for. And then once the film's complete or HGTV program's complete, then you submit what is a very similar application, but it's instead of the budget, it's the final cost report. And then we just need a copy of the film or program to watch, which is generally a link for us to watch. And we're just checking that everything you said at interim kind of marries up. Interim certification isn't actually compulsory. So if you didn't want to go for interim, you don't have to. We generally recommend you do, just to get that comfort that you're passing the cultural test. And if you need that interim certificate to claim on expenditure as you're incurring it. But if you didn't need to do that, you could technically just wait till the end and do a final application. Lloyd will probably maybe advise you against that. I don't know, but
no, completely. If you're not making an interim claim, why do the interim certificate unless you're worried? I'd always recommend doing it. I was just thinking, actually, Alex, when you're looking at projects, do you, obviously 18 is the pass fail? Do you have a higher number that actually makes you feel more comfortable, like when you're assessing?
To be honest, no. I do try and hit 18 if I can hit more. Then fantastic. But sometimes, I think if I'm very confident in how we're structuring it, obviously if things start changing and you've got that buffer to work with, then great, because you have a bit more flexibility with creative teams to say, okay, you want to do this a little bit differently. Great, we can still make this work. But if we're working with a project that maybe is got a few more, say, non-UK, non-EA elements, I'll be quite specific on maybe where the red lines are with the team in terms of what flexibility we have. So I think if you can achieve more, do, because you have flexibility when things start to change. But at the same time, it's not always possible.
No, of course.
So Lloyd, you accountant's report. Maybe you can just talk a bit more about that report, the when and the why, just to give the audience a bit more, so where it fits in the overall process.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, the only time you need an interim is if you're applying for a low budget film, and that's us assessing and signing off that you meet the budget criteria, which is self-explanatory, and that we've tested the nationality or residency of the director or scriptwriter. So we'll need you to provide their passport, for instance, or proof of their residential address. At final, if you're claiming points in C, or if it's IFTC, it's the same again. Plus, if you're claiming points in section C or D, we're going to need to test those points. So if we're saying 80% of the shoot happened in the UK, okay, I need your shooting schedule, and I need it where the shoot took place, and location hire agreements, studio hire agreements, so that I can go, yeah, I've tested that. We then sign that off to Chris and his team saying, we've tested back to underlying contracts that they've met the 80% threshold, the 50% threshold. And the same with VFX. We'd get the VFX contract, and we'd get third-party confirmation and evidence that where the VFX took place. And then for section D, same for audio post, music post, audio post, picture post, or music recording. And then for the section D, the evidence of nationality is the same as I mentioned for the IFTC. It's about testing back to passports or other proof of nationality. That we have to do at the time that the final certificate is being applied for, because we need to know we're testing the right person. It'd be great to do it all in advance. We could do it during production, but if the lead editor changes because they were ill or something, or there's a creative difference and you end up sacking your director and going with a new director, and you were relying on that point, we need to do the testing at final based on who actually did the work. So we would do that, sign it all off, and then our accountant's report gets added to the online system and gets sent in to Chris and the team at the BFI.
Great. So Lloyd and Chris, maybe we can talk a bit more about claiming the incentive. I know that in the past, EP has done a master series and multiple blogs on this, so we can post that once this is over in terms of a reference point. But maybe we could walk through that claiming process.
Sure. I think if I can just emphasize the one thing that I always want to say to everyone is how you pass a cultural test doesn't impact your tax credit. As long as you pass, it's a gateway test. You need to pass it. You need to be a qualifying co-production, and then you're eligible, and then you will get what you're eligible for. It's not congratulations, you got 35 points. Unfortunately, you're not getting a 5% bonus to your tax credit. We'd love it if that was the case, perhaps, but that just isn't the practicalities of it. You just need to pass, and then you're eligible interim to make an interim claim, or to make your final, because you can make multiple claims over the course of production. Typically, we would see one at the end of shoot and one at the end of production. Alex, I know that's how you and I have typically structured things in the past, because end of shoot is a natural break point in production, isn't it?
Yeah, that always feels like a good point for us. You've done most of, the largest portion of your spend, I guess. So for us, we're looking at it from trying to get as much back as possible, repay tax credit loans, reduce your interest. So doing it straight after shoot, capturing the shoot portion, and then doing it on delivery, capturing the post portion. It's just a very natural split, but also really maximizes what you're able to pay back at the interim stage.
Yeah. And then sort of timing wise, particularly for final, because interim will already have the certificate. We should. For final, we'll get the application done straight away so we can send it in to Chris, because we still need to do the claim work as well. So we're doing the claim work while the BFI are doing their assessment on the final project, and the turnaround times are 8 to 10 weeks at the moment, I think, Chris. The final, well, for all of them actually.
All the time, yeah.
So that means that typically, I mean, best will in the world, 8 to 10 weeks is pretty good to turn around the claim, so that we can do that. We get the certificate back from Chris and we're ready to file. And then HMRC normally turn around the credit claim within about 10 weeks themselves. So 20 weeks post the end of shoot, or 20 weeks after the end of completion of the film, you can be looking at having the cash in your account. That would be on the quick side, but it is definitely achievable.
I guess the point to highlight. Sorry, go ahead, Chris, please.
I was going to say, if you need a certificate quicker than 8 to 10 weeks, just for financing reasons or to go with your claim, we're kind of we try to help where possible. So, I mean, please do come to us and say we need it within 3-4 weeks, and we will always try and do what we can.
Yeah,
I can attest to that. We've been in situations where for closing, things have needed to happen slightly quicker, and Chris and his team have always been incredibly helpful in helping us meet some really tight deadlines. So
I think the thing I always try and say to people, particularly US side clients of mine, is they're really friendly at the BFI. They want to help. They want they're engaged. They're not trying to say no to anyone. So there's always there's no fear. Like, let's ask the question. They always want to help, which is great. It's great to have that relationship with and that approach from the sort of the administrative body.
So Alex and Chris, maybe we can talk a bit about, share some tips for a smooth process for producers.
Yeah, I'm happy to start on that. I think the number one thing for me, if you are setting up an SPV for your project, is to set that up with plenty of time, and it's essential that it's set up before you start any work on the production, because all expenditure has to go through the one company. Otherwise, it's not meeting the requirements. So that's kind of key there. I think, I mean, I've said this already, but just come to us early and talk through the project if you're unsure about anything. Just read through the guidelines and see what supporting documents you need to attach to the form. If you're attaching all the supporting documents that we need for the assessment, and it's a straightforward assessment, then we're generally not going to have any queries, and we'll turn it around fairly quickly. But I think, it's just, if you're unsure on anything, just come to us here in the team and we'll kind of guide you through it, basically.
Alex, what about you? Any tips you could share?
Yeah, from my perspective, I think obviously everything that Chris has said from an application process, but particularly with the final in mind, when you're starting to think about making that final application, you'll have to go through the audit process and prove that you've met certain requirements, as Lloyd explained. But you shouldn't think about those things at that point in time. You need to have thought about those things at the very, initiation of the project. Okay, what am I going to need to support everything in Section D? As a rule in the UK anyway, you always gather passports to demonstrate right to work. So your production accountants team will be doing that. But regardless, I think if you're in charge of it or working with a team who are in charge of it, be in line with them on checking, okay, how have we proved that we've met Section D? Okay, VFX. What does our contract demonstrate? Does it demonstrate the exact amount of, we got the bid attached, so it delineates the number of shots as well as the actual bid, the bid amount, and potentially the VFX schedule as well. So it's just being really buttoned up on all the docs and evidence which you would do anyway, when you're creating paperwork and contracts. That's just the way you run a production well. But at the same time, just make sure you're thinking about those things from day one.
And Lloyd, as the auditor, as the person who manages the overall process, what about you? Tips for a smoother process?
Speak to us and speak to the BFI. Ask the questions early. And if you can have a couple of points, as Alex said, in your back pocket, that helps. It gives you the flexibility. The one thing I would say that can catch US productions out sometimes, or US originated, is FX. If you're relying on spend points, particularly for VFX, where it could be high numbers FX could impact that. So if you're sailing close to the wind on your 80% and you're relying on an exchange rate of, I don't know, 1.25, moves against you, that could be a problem. So always, that's one that I'm always keen to watch out for. And if you're going to change something, yeah, that's worth knowing. And then Chris's example earlier is one of my favorite. Watch out for scenes that get left on the cutting room floor. If you're relying on an establishing scene that sets the nationality of one of your characters, and that gets left on the cutting room floor, doesn't matter that it was in the original script. If we don't see it on screen and we can't know that, it doesn't count. So just watch out for those. And as Alex said, it's about managing a relationship with the creative side and making sure they know where the red lines are. I don't care what else you have to cut. You're not cutting that 30 seconds.
Right. That's a great point. So before we go to audience questions, I just wanted to touch on co-productions and the cultural test. And I'll just say with regards to co-productions, EP did a really great master series and a blog that you can find on ep.com that just talks about co-productions in general, not just UK specific. But if anyone's interested in learning more about co-pros, I definitely suggest you go to a master series that we did probably about a year ago, but it's still all very relevant. Yeah. So let's just talk about co-productions and the cultural test. Maybe you, Lloyd, and Chris can talk about the BFI process.
Yeah, so the main thing is it's different. If you're doing an official co-production, you are not passing the cultural test, or you don't have to pass the cultural test. It's a different approach. And the form, it's still on the same system. It's still a really good system, but it is different. And I think, Chris, it's probably fair to say you've got to provide more information on a co-pro than you do for a standard film.
Yeah, I mean, an official co-production is not a points-based test. It's purely looking at the financing and filmmaking spend of a project and the person's working on it. And we have around 12 or 13 treaties now with different countries around the world. And we also we're part of the European Convention Treaty, which pretty much, every country in Europe is within the convention. And that allows you to co-produce with countries throughout Europe on film only at the moment. So yeah, it's a more complicated structure than a cultural test, definitely. I guess it's important to note that there is official co-production, which comes to us as within the BFI to assess under the treaty, but also there's unofficial co-production. And if you are doing an unofficial co-production and you still want to access the UK tax incentives, then obviously you would need to go through the cultural test with that structure. You're not qualifying through a treaty, but you're still co-producing with another country or another producer, but you're using the cultural test still to qualify as a British project. That's a very quick overview of co-production.
That's great, but I think Alex has an example of the, Victorian Psycho, which you can maybe walk us through, and then it'll sort of apply to some of these concepts with regards to a co-production.
Yeah, of course. We are exploring a co-production on Victorian Psycho with Lloyd actually at the moment. So we're shooting the film in Ireland and we're doing post-production in the UK. Originally, we were exploring it as a non-co-production and just kind of, operating as services in each. But then I started to dig into it a little bit further, and we do not have a British writer or director on this, so we can't qualify for the new IFTC. However, we do have a European writer. So that means that we can start looking at not the cultural test, but how you qualify as a European film. And there's a kind of set criteria that you have to meet. And if you qualify as a European co-production under an official co-production treaty, as Chris said, then you can access the IFTC. So it's that caveat of it's either a British writer or director or an official European co-pro. So that got our minds thinking, okay, if we actually went down the co-production route, it's an Irish British co-production, kind of that actually has a positive impact on our tax credit position. So it's quite worth looking at, especially if you have European elements, but maybe not a British writer or director, because you might still qualify for the IFTC, and it just, that jump between the 39.75 versus the 20, Lloyd, 25.
25.5, yeah. So it's very valuable. You always get slightly less money under a co-production just from the nature of the structuring, but if you're getting slightly less at 39%, it's still more than 25.5%. So it's certainly very worth it. And I think, as Chris said, it's an access route to the IFTC if you don't have a British writer, lead writer, or British lead director. It's another way that you can access IFTC. And certainly from my perspective, I'm working on nearly as many active co-productions at the moment as I have co-productions in the previous 6 or 7 years. So yeah, there's more to them. They're a little bit more complicated, as Chris said. That you're looking at financing and cultural contribution in ratios, but they're a great access point. And in some jurisdictions, there's additional money for co-productions. So there's lots of reasons you might want to look at it, really.
Yeah, if you're co-producing with another country, then you have to look at what the requirements are in that other country to accessing their funds and incentives. If you need to qualify officially there, then the official co-production is probably the best route. But yeah, we've definitely seen an increase in people speaking to us who don't have that British writer or director, and they're unable to kind of access the enhanced rate for low budget film through the cultural test. They're kind of looking at the co-production route now. But just a note, you still need to meet the 23.5 core spend requirement, so it has to be under that spend.
Right. So I think we're quickly running out of time, but I wanted to bring Natalie back on, so maybe we can go through at least a couple of audience questions. And for those that we don't answer here live, we can always answer them on ep.com or on EP's production log.
Correct. And yes, we are a little bit running at the end of time, but I do have a couple of questions that I'd like to pose. And thank you, Lloyd. I know you've been combing through the Q&A as we've gone. So you've happily answered some of these already. But one question that we got, and this came from a few of our registrants ahead of time, submitted these questions. A lot of questions about if I'm qualifying for or applying for the incentive based on actual production or post-production. Is the cultural test application, are the rules the same? Does everything apply the same no matter what phase of production you may be qualifying under?
Yes, in short. Okay. There is no official distinction from a tax credit perspective between production or post-production incentives. It is one scheme. It is the film or TV or video game, for that matter, incentive. If you pass the cultural test and you qualify in all other respects, you'll get the credit. So you don't, just because you're doing post-production over here doesn't mean you have to qualify in a different way. You're clearly not going to get points for shooting in the UK if you're only doing post-production over here. But otherwise, no, the rules apply the same and the cultural test is the same.
Okay, wonderful. We got a great real-world example question here. I have a British passport and I live in Canada. Would I qualify for production benefits for my services? Chris, could you maybe?
I think the important thing to note here is we're not generally looking at the persons. It's about whether you have a company in the UK. So you need to set up that company in the UK and run all the expenditure through that company and pass the cultural test. Whether you can achieve points for yourself within the cultural test, depending on what role you are in the project, that's something you can look at. But it's all about having that UK company and running all the costs through it and passing the cultural test. I don't know if you want to add anything there, Lloyd.
I suppose if you're a member of crew and you have a British passport, then it would help the majority of crew point. Or if you're a composer, it would get you a composer point. But on an actual incentive basis, it's used or consumed. If you're working in Canada, I'm not getting credit for you. And if you're working in the UK, don't care what nationality you are, you work in the UK, we'll get credit. So yeah, that would be the only very much incentives addition rather than the actual cultural test.
All right. Thank you for the clarity on that. We have another question. We've gotten a few about incentive combinations. What should we be using? What's best to use? So Alex, I'll pass this one to you as our local producer. Do you have any recommendations on regional subsidies to combine with the incentive, or has anything changed with the introduction of the new independent film tax credit?
Yeah, I mean, you've got great regional incentives. You've got Film Cymru, who are the Welsh body. So you can access kind of grant money through them, as well as like less preferential equity. So they're a great body if you're going to be filming in Wales. It's based on a kind of portion of the spend. And Chris, I think a lot of their funding works similarly to the BFI in terms of how they assess a project. So it's very selective, and they're looking at Welsh creative elements. So they're looking for, it's not just about, I'm coming here, I'm going to spend X amount of money in Wales. You have to really enhance the kind of Welsh creative elements that you're bringing to the table. There is also, though, in Wales, Creative Wales. Creative Wales is a strand of the Welsh government, and they are slightly more focused on the amount of money that you're bringing to the region. At Malice Bird's Mail Company, we worked a lot in Wales, and we combined Film Cymru funding with Creative Wales funding on single projects. So if you're a Welsh producer, or if you say you're somewhere else in the world and you decide you want to make something in the UK, maybe discuss with a Welsh producer, Welsh production company, because there's a lot of funding coming from Wales that you can combine with the tax incentives in the UK as well. Then you have Creative Scotland. Creative Scotland are offering some kind of great financial programs. There's the Production Growth Fund, which is heavily focused on the amount of spend that you're bringing to the region in Scotland. I've qualified under that before. We did have a Scottish actor, but we did not have like producing or directing kind of Scottish talent. Best to approach them in terms of what they need from Scottish creative packaging. But I think on the Production Growth Fund, you can qualify just in terms of the kind of spend that you're bringing to Scotland rather than the creative elements. And then they also have a post-production element as well, which we've been exploring with them. And I think that fund was temporary, but there's talk of it becoming permanent. And that is, again, that's kind of a ratio. So we looked at it for VFX to do 50% of our VFX on quite a big project in Scotland, and they were willing to put in a ratio of, I think it was 10-1 of funding against our VFX spend. That's a really interesting program, I think, to explore. And again, that would sit alongside the tax credit. So nothing's really changed in terms of the introduction of the IFTC. Those programs haven't reduced or changed. But you've also then got Liverpool as a region, who are putting in, again, bringing projects to the region. It's about spend. It's about how much you're doing in the region and how much crew you're employing. They are developing further services, post-production services in Liverpool at the moment. I know some are building a full suite up there so that they can offer more than just the production portion. And obviously, the BFI. The BFI's wonderful funding programs that they bring, which I'm sure Chris can talk more on. But there's lots of different programs under the BFI for development funding, production funding, also distribution elements. But that it's selective, it's creative, and it's got a real focus on British filmmaking talent, as I understand it, except for there is a co-production fund as well, Chris, isn't there?
Yeah, the co-production fund has been introduced. There's the Global Screen Fund, which has a co-production fund within that, but also within the BFI fund, which is separate to the Global Screen Fund, is separate to that. There's also a pot of money for co-production as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Just to very quickly add, none of these will affect the value of your incentive. They are financing in at the top and not affecting the value of your incentive.
Yeah.
Right. Wonderful.
Well,
Well, thank you. Thank you, panelists, for all of the wonderful information that you've shared with us today. And thank you to so many of our viewers for hanging on with us. I know we've run a little bit long today. So I would like to let everyone know that we did get a few questions about where to get the recording. And Joe kindly referenced that we have done quite a few webinars. We've actually done over 100 Master Series webinars, and you can find recordings of all of our sessions, including discussions about the independent film tax credit, about the AVEC regime, about a lot of different topics that we've covered related to the UK and to global incentives, global financing, tax and labor law, legislation, a lot of great content there. So we really do encourage that you visit ep.com/masterseries to see all the wonderful content that we have produced, and we will continue to add as we go. The other item I'd like to remind everyone is we also have a blog. Joe and Lloyd both kindly mentioned that we do have quite a few articles that have been written about these topics as well. The blog is really a wealth of knowledge from all of the thought leaders at Entertainment Partners with decades of experience who are sharing timely assessment and analysis of what's happening in the industry and really helping the industry to stay up to date when it comes to anything rapidly changing like production incentives or technology, any changes to legislation, payroll, processing, anything else like that. So we really encourage you to check out all of the wonderful resources and sign up for our incentives newsletter so you can stay up to date with everything changing there as well. Thank you again to everyone for joining us today. It was a pleasure to have you for today's Master Series, and we look forward to seeing you again at our next webinar.